Thank you, everyone. So we're just going to move on to our next talk now. So from spectrometry of proteins to spectrometry of soil and seeds. I didn't realise this was a connection until just then. Yeah, let's just say I did. So Dr. Jamie Flynn from Hone AG is going to talk to us about the evolution of the hardware over time. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate the invite, Ray, very much, and also Stone and Chalk for having us here and putting up with me for quite a few years. I just found that last talk was, for me, it was just kind of goosebumps the whole way. Because it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. And there was even one slide where it was the one with the crosses of like you've got, your scientists collecting data, machine over here, and processing, and it goes back and forth. I thought that was actually a really good lead-in for what we do, which is a different part of that, where if you take the instrument, which is a very, got a slide that deals with it. So that's our picture. You had one of Dali with a huge machine. Like you can imagine that is exactly where we were, myself and the other two co-founders in the mid 2010s, doing our PhDs on those exact machines. We were using infrared spectroscopy, so all in the same sort of domain. You guys go like way down into detail to another level, but we would use these spectrometers that send the infrared or near to the visible spectrum, and you can use that information to correlate to chemical concentrations of certain molecules, which is super helpful. So that was us sort of spending all this time, and you need a huge amount of patience and skill and experience to operate these machines properly, and that's just one piece of the puzzle that you guys presented so well, where things can go wrong along the way. But as we were doing this, and we saw all the different types of sensors coming out, the miniaturization of a whole lot of different optical sensors and components, electronic components, and computing power and cloud computing taking off, I just thought, geez, this is absolutely right for, can we get this technology to everyday users that could actually be informed. And for us, that's in agriculture, where you'll have farmers, taking off their crops. We focus mostly on wheat and barley, and more recently looking into soil carbon. And they get paid on the percentage of protein that is in their crop. The higher protein, the more they get paid. But they only get paid that when they to their crop, drive it into the silo, which could be kilometres away, and then GrainCorp or Cargill or one of these other buyers will then tell them what they're going to get paid for it, because they have this special machine. And to us, it was like, we can make that smaller and everyone can have that, and they know the quality. They can pick the most at that particular time. Like, let's try and flip that dynamic, and the people putting in the hard work actually decide what they'll get paid for it. So that's a journey that we thought would be like, which is like 9 years ago, and still working very hard to make that a reality, and really nice to see it starting to come true now. But that's the concept, is if you were to take that slide that you guys presented, we're that offshoot going out doing something else, while you guys were working with the scientists to make those insights a reality. So if we look at the platform that we have now, we've now got this particular instrument that measures the grain. It's a handheld tool, and Ray has got some of our tools, and well, this most recent one, as well as a bunch of the prototypes that we spent many years working with, not throwing them in the bin, but at least putting them up on the shelf and going, let's try again. And Ray's going to pass those out, and we'll have a little look at all of those a bit later. But the idea is that you've got a spectrometer, which still delivers very high resolution. So it's sort of analysis of the light signals that come back or pass through these samples. But that's all sort of passed through using cloud computing. It goes into a system that we call Home Create. So there's a whole software side that we built out on this, and one other tie-in with mass dynamics. So it's been in 2018, we built this system Home Create, which could use machine learning, what we thought was for the first time, to look at spectra and correlate that and build these regression models to tell you what the chemical concentration of whatever it was you were looking at. And before then it was using those outdated sort of 80s, 90s software tools that are still very, very prevalent. I sent an email to Mass, I can't remember, and I was like, hey guys, look at what you're doing. I reckon you'd be interested in this Home Create business. That's why I did not get a reply back. So, that was, yeah, you guys were working on a different level there. But so it goes into this system, but the user doesn't really see that. Some users do. We've opened that up to users that are like closer to developers of these chemometric models, and they can build their own and deploy their own. But for a typical user, they don't see that. They do the scan, and then result comes on their mobile, it's in web platform, and then the whole storage and deployment of those results is another story. But today I thought I'd focus on the hardware side and give you a little trip down memory lane for me, which is the family tree of where we came to that sort of larger unit, which is a unit now. So first, after huge instruments and then looking at, hey, there's companies out there making these smaller spectrometers that can sort of fit in the palm of your hand. There were companies making these dev kits for really like quite impressive like ranges and resolutions that we didn't think was possible. So we got a bunch of them. And then we looked at Raman spectroscopy as well, which is better for liquids and fine powders. So we've got these smaller handheld units. Well, let's just use our Home Create system and be able to deploy that. We'll own the most years. Agriculture, with all of the sort of intense environmental sort of pressures that come with that, not a single one could really stand up to it. And so, like the idiots we are, we're like, oh, we'll just make our own hardware. That's all good. I screwed up my slides. So, what was meant to come up here was just that little rectangular box that should be floating around here, and we called that the phone lab. So this was the first guy, and we actually took the dev kit here, the one that showed the most promise, and stuck that in this unit that we 3D printed and painted, and there was a hell of a lot of hot glue gun action. I remember soldering all these pieces together as we were getting them out to people, and surprisingly they worked all right. They were okay, but the hardware was fine. All of the software, we just had no fucking idea how hard that was. So all of that time, you can imagine a whole nother family tree of the software components going along with that and firmware. So after this guy, we made is the Engineering Validation Test Unit 5, EVT5. This it looks like a Pokeball. Same sensor, different design, and improved a whole bunch of things there. what's super interesting about this is these are still floating around. Like I got one back in the mail the other day. They'd smashed the optic window in the front and asked for a replacement. It's like, I didn't even know these things are still working and out there. So it's amazing, like, what you can build by mistake can sometimes be super robust. So that was that. But then after, we were always, I guess, geez, that's totally different from the other day. Anyway, after engaging with a bunch of agronomists, like really getting deep into the industry, like having investors that were actually from the agricultural industry, we got access to people that could give us the proper feedback we needed. And what was really important was bringing them into the design phase of, okay, this is not where we're going to land. We're thinking about, hey, how do we make this better? Does it actually work for you with the type of samples you're using? So there was a couple of offshoots. These are sort of concept designs that we had a very limited production around. This guy never sort of took off, but this one was super interesting, and that's where we got into the soil stuff, because with this hammerhead approach, we're able to have multiple sensors in there. We could pass light through a sample and collect that data on a sensor, but then from the other side, we're getting the reflectance and transmission. And we realised, yeah, we can actually blow this out and look at different sample types. So from that, we ended up with essentially these two variants which are in production now. I'd love to see what this looks like in a couple of years, but this is what we use for our grain customers. It's got a little hopper in the front, put your grain in there, and it's got the same concept, but this one actually works when you really dive down into the industrial design of something. It's amazing what you don't see, and often it takes a lot of opinions and input from other people to make you see something that should be obvious, but to yourself sometimes isn't. So we managed to convert this hammerhead design into keep that in the longitudinal form of this unit. So we've got a sensor up here and a sensor down here, and the light can pass through. We get reflectance and transmission, which in itself was a big deal. Like those big benchtop units, like they don't do that. And it was one of those things that sort of blew us away when something works really well. People kind of stop, or an industry can stop pushing hard to, why don't we do reflectance and transmission? It actually wasn't that crazy an idea, but no one had done it. So, and there's a whole story of how to do it properly, but that's that unit for grain. But then we've got this other unit here, which is the same base unit, but that's for soil, so it's more of a point and shoot device. Now, the other side of the family tree is sort of the, this is where we split out all the Raman spectroscopy. So we ended up designing a device that does NIR and Raman all in the one device. That is still in development after many, many years. And it's gone through so many pauses and stops. I never want to let that one go. But we did come up with a Raman unit as well. But after this whole journey, like designing everything ourselves, this was one where we were like, I think there's a better way to do it at this point, and enough time had passed that another company had come up with, I guess, an OEM system, not just a dev kit, but a full system that we could house properly and for the sample types we were interested in, and basically put out a Raman unit for liquid and powders, not just grains and soils, like really heterogeneous materials. So that is probably the good news story, is that there is sometimes such an easier way to do things. But but you often have to go through the pain to actually recognise it. And I think that that's a really good example. That took about 1 year to get out, and this one was a very, very long time. But I don't think we could have done that without sort of going through that whole journey. So I thought it would be fun just to look at the family tree, and when I put that together, it was quite shocking how many different iterations we've done. And there are others that I'm just too embarrassed to put up there at the moment. But I'll leave it there. But again, just wanted to thank you guys for letting me tell that story. I think the mix of software development and hardware was really nice tonight.
Yeah.
It's a good story. So thank you.
Any questions?
Yep.
Thank you so much for sharing and bringing your hardware. I had a question with who are your ultimate customers? Because you started out sharing about grains, and then you mentioned soil, and I imagine like the customer groups would drastically change what your end product would look like.
Yeah.
It seems like you've got three.
Yeah. So I'll keep it to grain and soil, and I'll cover grain first. It's an interesting one because I guess what I spoke about at the beginning, you've got these farmers, harvest everything, then find out. A big part of what we're doing is bringing down the price point of all of this to make entry to market. Don't make a tool easy to use for everyone if everyone can't pay for it. Well, not everyone, but everyone in that market can't afford it or see the value of it. So it actually, for the grain, it's pretty much all the growers, the people growing the grain. They're the ones that want it, like small to medium-sized farms. But then when you get to the larger corporate farms, they're interested in buying multiple ones, but for all their different sites. So then it's a whole question on user management, which has been a big learning curve for us of how do you manage these different, how people want to interact with your device and then with the data afterwards. But then you've also got these agronomists, which are, a farmer's absolute sort of best friend, and an agronomist will serve 2 to 10 to 15 different farms, giving them advice, but also conducting tests through traditional labs, taking samples, sending them off. So for them, they want one, but they're going to use it for 15 different farms. So it's the agronomists and the growers are the key ones for grain. Soil is really interesting because that's all around the carbon credits at the moment, and we positioned ourselves as the accessible measurement tool to do that, because lab testing for soil carbon is just insanely expensive for how many tests you need to do to participate in those programs. So in that case, it's all of the soil carbon program project managers. So there's companies that just manage all the paperwork and the soil sampling to make that happen and then deliver the carbon credits or to the customer, and they take a click of the ticket. So for us, it's just, for soil work, it's more selling to those carbon project managers. So every sample type is just a totally different commercial approach. And that's why, so easy for us as a startup. We just went so wide, so early. We can test everything, and yeah, we could, but you can't scale that unless you really understand it, and that's where it's taken a long time to hone down and understand the customer enough to give them something useful. So yeah, that's those customers. We're still working on the others.
What's the spectral range and the spectral resolution for these systems?
Well, that's a good question too. For the grain work, that is using a sensor that it goes from 650 to 1050 nanometers, and the spectral resolution differs throughout that wavelength range, as you probably know. I'll get back to you on the numbers of that, but the other unit that's used for the soil measurement, that's 1350 to 2550 nanometers. The spectral resolution at like 1550 nanometers is 16 nanometers. And again, that changes, but, and that's good. But yeah, it can be better, and we're definitely, working deeper into the hardware, into the sensor space now because things move so quick now, and we've seen how we can enhance that quite a bit. So, but that'll be another generation of the family.
Sorry, was there one more quick question? Oh,
so you talked about this challenge of grabbing different sensors and dev kits and turning into a production unit. Maybe you can talk about probably the things you learned about qualifying hardware and how you made sure that those dev kits provided sufficient accurate results.
Yep, no, that's a really good question, and something that we still, really focus on a lot today is you can do a lot of testing under lab conditions, and it matches the data sheet. Cool. All right, go and ride with that thing clipped on your, on your jeans on a motorbike at 45 degrees, like some of these farmers do. Like that is literally the feedback we got when we first started, interviewing agronomists and bringing them in closer. They were we were shocked at how they treat their gear, or not how they treat their gear. They're pretty good with the gear that they know to take care of, but everything they have on them and expect to have on them is going for the ride, like with whatever conditions they're in. From sub-zero temperatures to, it could be sitting on the Land Cruiser dashboard and going to 75, 80 degrees easily. So that was a huge wake-up call, and we still use them at this design house in Sydney. Very good. D&I is their name, and we had them all, and these are fucking crack engineers, like really, really good. And I've only sort of appreciated them more and more as the years go on, but I remember having them in that room, and they kind of had their A team there, because they thought, this is the next big thing, cool. And then we had the farmers and agronomists come in, and they explained how they would use something like that, as we had described, test your crops out wherever you are. And I just saw the blood drain from these crack engineers, like going, because I said to them, we got to build military grade stuff. Before I went in, they're like, we do military all the time, don't worry about it. And these farmers started talking, oh man, they didn't even have a word or a grade for what they would have to do to make this, what we call a rugged device. It's like, I can't overstate how much engineering went into making that survive those conditions that it will go through. And that's where, you can test third-party stuff, and if it's made for purpose, that's great, but often they're not, and we found that out so quickly early on. And but we're still using those engineers, so they overcame every single issue there. And that's a good question. That brings back some good memories for me. I thought that was funny.
Okay, all right, well, thank you, Jamie.
Cool.
Thank you.